The following edition of the Edgington Post interview series is brought to you by the Free Talk Live AMP program. Become a Free Talk Live amplifier today for as little as $3 a month. Get perks and help us get on more radio stations and more internet connections at amp.freetalklive.com. That's amp.freetalklive.com. And here's Mark.
All right, it's another edition of the Edgington Post. We're not getting these Edgington Posts out as much as we used to. I've got to say, it's probably has something to do with the amount of space that we can use up on our server when we serve them up. So I'm sorry for folks that are looking for lots of Edgington Posts, but I think this one's a great one. And I have in the studio with me, actually, Bill Walker. Bill Walker, go ahead and say hi.
Hi, yeah, I'm currently writing for antiwar.com. I belong to the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance. I'm the Ron Paul campaign chairman in Sullivan County, so I cover a lot of libertarian bases.
You do a little blogging over at LouRockwell.com, too.
Yes, I do. And I also write for the Patch website in Bedford, New Hampshire. So yes.
The Bedford Patch, is that what it's called?
Bedford, New Hampshire Patch.
I'm familiar with it, actually. And you have a new article out at antiwar.com that I wanted to talk to you about because I, read through it, and so many people are concerned with military spending, defense spending here in the United States, that we need to spend, the government needs to be smaller, but we need to spend more money on defense. And you have an article here that actually talks about how the United States isn't spending on defense.
That's right. We spend a lot on the military. Now, Romney was constantly bringing out as his position in the debate that the United States needed to spend more on the military. But if you look at what the United States does spend, we spend as much as the rest of the world put together. Our official military budget is about 43% of total military spending. However, that doesn't count a lot of things. We don't even count nuclear warheads as part of the military budget. Nuclear warheads are a few $1 billion in the Department of Energy.
Oh, they're producing a lot of energy. Those things are.
Oh, yes. Let's hope they don't. Then there's we have $75 billion in the black budget that goes to our 17 intelligence agencies. The Veterans Administration, to take care of the results of our military on our own soldiers, is $132 billion a year. We give foreign aid, which is mostly the on-budget foreign aid is mostly for military help to various regimes, including Pakistan and North Korea, where we paid for both of their nuclear bombs. That's $53 billion a year. Homeland Security spending to handle the blowback from our military affairs is $57 billion. And then there's a lot of off-budget stuff that goes through the Federal Reserve. You can read about it in the recent Bloomberg Freedom of Information Act request. It's just incredible amounts go out through the Federal Reserve. But anyway, it's at least $1 trillion overall for the military. But
in a year.
In a year. Every single year. However, we don't have any actual defenses. We don't have any missile defenses. We have 30 interceptors which protect Alaska. But that's only if the attacker promises not to use any decoys or ECM. So most of our cities are wide open to any form of military attack. The British or French, which are both military powers and have both attacked us in the past, could attack us again. So if you're worried about the French, I'm afraid you still have to worry. We don't have any anti-aircraft defense. That was proven on 9/11. A civilian airliner was able to hit the Pentagon. Even though we had 20 minutes warning, there was absolutely no missiles or fighters or anything that could get up and stop it. Because while we have lots of Patriot missiles and we have lots of F-15s and F-14s and F-16s, they're all guarding Riyadh or bombing people in Afghanistan or patrolling over Waziristan. They're not protecting Washington, D.C. or New York City.
So they don't have a combat aircraft protecting Washington, D.C.?
There are some combat aircraft which are tasked with protecting Washington, D.C. However, they cannot actually get up quickly enough to do anything. And
yeah, I mean, how could they get up quickly enough?
Well, you could. If back in the 60s, we actually had an effective anti-aircraft defense. The National Guard units and Air Force between them had a couple thousand interceptors that were actually based in the United States instead of in the Middle East. And we actually had a radar net that looked around the entire country for a couple of years. We usually had gaps in it. But anyway, right now, we don't have radar coverage in most directions. That's why the drug smugglers just come right across the southern border with no problem. As far as defending the United States, there just isn't any. You could if Nauru or Liechtenstein decided to build long-range drones and attack the United States, there's absolutely nothing stopping them from getting through. And
that's disturbing. Okay.
Then, of course, in the modern times, we're only supposed to think about terrorists because no nation would ever attack us. Personally, I think we should still worry about nations. All it takes is one out of control guy. One out of control guy gets into Pakistan or India or Russia or China, and all of a sudden we're back to needing defenses against nations. But okay, we'll ignore that for the moment. Let's look at terrorism. Terrorism means you have to have responses against a bomb that goes off by surprise because it was brought in by UPS or just trucked in, and you have absolutely no warning at all. That means you need civil defense. If a nuclear bomb goes off, you need to be able to go quickly down to your basement bunker with its filtered air supply. Now, in some countries, that actually happens. Israel, China, and especially the Swiss. I want to talk about the Swiss
China,
tonight.
They have basements with filtered air?
Some people in China actually have some shelters. They have a civil defense program. It's not as extensive as the Swiss. Well, let's go back to the Swiss, because the Swiss are a fairly unique country and need to be studied by people who are interested in preventing wars. Because unlike the United States, that is always at war, the Swiss have not been in a foreign war since 1815.
1815? What foreign war were they in then?
They were the Napoleonic Wars ran over Switzerland.
Yeah, that would have been right. Okay, sure.
And after that,
so they just lost essentially.
Yes,
okay.
yes. There
did everybody at that point.
right. Everybody lost to Napoleon. You can't hold that against the Swiss. So after Napoleon, they upgraded their defenses and they got their system organized, and they were able to stay out of World War I and World War II, even though, unlike the United States, which is probably in the best position of any country in the world as far as staying out of trouble, the Swiss are in the absolute worst spot.
Yeah.
They're worse. They're next to the Germans. They're next to the French. They're next to the Italians. They're next to the Austrians. All four of those nations have built their entire histories on conquering other countries.
Indeed.
So the Swiss have three elements in their defense. First of all, they stay out of trouble. They do not send troops to the Middle East. They do not send foreign aid to hold up all the dictators of the world. They mind their own business. The second thing they do is they have a citizen army, which is completely decentralized and not controlled from the federal level. The individuals actually have the weapons in their own houses. They have their own anti-tank rockets or whatever up on the wall.
Good Lord.
And that's why they've been able to stay out of war. The Norwegians had a militia system before World War II, but it didn't work. In fact, it worked against them because their weapons were in centralized armories, and the Germans actually dropped the paratroops onto Norwegian armories, took the artillery, which the Germans would not have been able to transport there, and actually conquered Norway more easily because of the weapons the Norwegians themselves had.
So centralized, armories don't work.
Right. The more spread out something is, especially if you're trying to be peaceful, if you're trying to set up a system that can handle a surprise attack, centralization will kill you. Look at France. France had a much bigger military budget than Switzerland, and it fell apart in 1 month against Hitler because it was very centralized, and the Blitzkrieg was able to target certain areas behind the lines and disrupt the French army. The Swiss, every house was the army. There simply wasn't anywhere to go. The Germans thought about attacking the Swiss. Hitler hated the Swiss because the Swiss provided secret banking, which allowed a lot of Jews to escape Hitler. In modern times, we've been hit with a lot of propaganda about how evil the Swiss were and how they didn't spend enough time tracking down the Jews after World War II to give them their secret account money and stuff because they'd been killed. But the truth is, the Swiss helped save more Jews than any other country. They made it possible for a lot of people to escape.
How so?
Because the Germans, who did not have secret accounts in Switzerland, just had all their stuff confiscated by the Nazis, so they didn't have the money. Yeah, the Jews didn't have the money to buy tickets or bribe immigration officials, because in 1938... The world actually got together, the United States, England, France, Australia, all the major powers except Russia got together and had a big conference about the Jewish problem called the Evian Conference. And at that conference, they decided that, yes, the Germans were putting the Jews in camps, and no, they weren't going to do anything about it, and they just left all their immigration controls in place.
Right.
FDR actually used our Navy and Coast Guard to turn back ships full of Jews and force them back to Germany where they died.
Was it more than one ship? Because I do have one ship.
Yes,
okay.
It happened more than once. And, of course, the announcement kept a lot of people from trying that otherwise could have. So the only people that escaped were the ones that had money in somewhere that the Nazis couldn't get to it, that they could use to bribe their way past the immigration barriers and get into other countries.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So Hitler hated the Swiss.
If you're standing at the line there where you're hoping to get out of the country, you hope you have yourself a gold sovereign or a franc, inside your coat that you could hand off to somebody and get through.
Yeah, I mean, I will have to admit most of my money is in paper accounts, but the paper accounts don't really do you much good if
you can't get to them.
If they decide to take them, and every year Congress introduces a bill to save Social Security by confiscating people's IRAs. so yeah, it's definitely a potential problem for us. So anyway, Hitler did hate the Swiss, and he came up with he ordered his generals to prepare an invasion plan called Operation Tannenbaum, and they wargamed it out several ways. They were planning to float planes into the Swiss Alps lakes, and they were planning to drop paratroops various places. And every time they wargamed it out, they would drop the troops, and they would all get killed because every single person had a rifle. And there just wasn't any place you could put paratroops in Switzerland without getting them shredded. So they weren't able to use the blitzkrieg methods.
Yeah, this is the same set of geniuses that decided to attack Russia. So you can see that they were somewhat optimistic in their planning.
Yes, but even their optimism, they realized that the Swiss invasion would just have been a complete disaster, which it would have, and so they gave up and left Switzerland alone. The third element of Swiss defense is that they have civil defense. In 1934, they started a civil defense program to handle the problem of aerial bombing for World War II, and they started constructing shelters. And in 1961, they started a program to build nuclear shelters for the whole country. And now,
is that effective now? I mean, I suppose it would be effective for some people that were, outside the sort of the blast zone or whatever, right?
It's completely effective against fallout. If the other countries in Europe have a war and Switzerland is not directly bombarded, it'll be 100% effective because even a relatively small shelter, if you're just 3 feet underground in a well-designed basement that has an air filter system, the radiation level is reduced by more than 1,000.
Okay.
And
sounds good.
The bigger shelters are even better. I mean, they have shelters. The Swiss have shelters under every single house, every single school, and every single business.
Now, did they subsidize that? I mean, or is that just a culture of preparedness?
Well, it's a combination. They did subsidize it. I think it's a tax credit system, and interestingly, it's not at the federal level.
Now, this is the same. I mean, we have tax credits for all kinds of crap out there. Things that may or may not be of any use to the country or individuals.
But because it's not done by the military, it's done by individuals using their own contractors. It's kept efficient, and it's not even done at the federal level anymore. They did do it at the federal level for a little while when they started the program, but at this point, it's all down to the cantons, so it's like comparable to our states. Okay, and it's not that expensive. At the peak of the program in the 80s, they were spending $33 a year. Now, correct for inflation, that's probably 4 times that nowadays, or maybe 5 times. So it might have been
$33 a year to what?
To build all these shelters. So all these shelters, because they started in 1961 and kept building them through the early 90s, and now they just build them under any new construction. Mm-hmm. But they managed to retrofit their whole country with shelters for about, in modern money, probably about, in current money, about $150 a year.
Wow!
And you compare that to to give a comparison, our military spends about 6% of our GDP every year. The Swiss spend about 0.9%. So their military expenditures are very, very low compared to ours.
And that's just to protect the Pope, right?
No, that's in the Vatican budget. I don't know what those figures would be.
Okay.
But
this is the Swiss Guard. I'm just making a Swiss Guard.
Yes.
Best I can do.
They have a couple hundred Swiss Guards around the Vatican. But the civil defense the Swiss have, if a major power attacked the Swiss full on and used, if the United States used all 8,500 warheads that we have, on the Swiss, yes, the Swiss would be beaten up badly.
Sure.
However, presumably they're not going to directly fight a major power all by themselves, and if just a couple of bombs hit them, their casualties will be much reduced. If other countries fight and the fallout comes over, they'll be totally protected. And as far as any terrorism is concerned, the Swiss went the exact opposite way the United States did.
Yeah, I'm interested in this.
In the United States, we disarmed ourselves and made ourselves easier for terrorists to attack, and we didn't harden ourselves at all. There's no gas mask for people in New York City. There's no shelters in New York City. There's no civil defense of any kind. If a terrorist attack goes off in an American city, it will kill just as many people as it would have before 9/11, and people will be less able to defend themselves. Remember in Mumbai in India a couple years ago, they had a terrorist attack with people just using AK-47s?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in Switzerland, if a couple guys get AK-47s and walk down the street trying to shoot people, that'll last for about 3 people, and then someone's going to go get their SIG and blow them to bits.
Indeed, they will. I mean, an armed populace is going to take care of that problem before the police can ever show up.
The burglary rate in Switzerland is very low, and that might have something to do with that as well.
I would think so. I live in a town where they have no town cop, but the burglary rate is extraordinarily low. Chances are good that if you, in this little country New Hampshire town decided to break into somebody's home and they happen to be there, that you're going to get yourself some .44 caliber brain surgery.
Yeah, burglary in New Hampshire is not a long-term career proposition. So, back to the defense. If the United States adopted the Swiss system, it would have a lot of advantages over the Swiss. We're not next to Germany or Russia. We have big oceans next to us and friendly countries next to us, and we have a lot more space. If we spent the amount of money that the Swiss spent on shelters, we could make ourselves invulnerable to even a major power attacking us. It wouldn't mean that no one would die.
How could we? When you say we, when you say we, it sounds like taxes.
I'm suggesting to people that believe in national defense paid for by taxes that if they want some defense, they're going to have to start spending it on defense. Now, we could have a show on how you could do anarcho-capitalist defense like the Tannehills or David Friedman have talked about.
Sure.
And that would be a good show, and I agree that's how it's going to be eventually.
But it seemed like tax subsidies itself would be, like you had talked about, essentially building these shelters. I mean, that in and of itself sounded pretty good.
If you're going to spend money on defense, the most effective thing to do is spend it on defense. We currently are spending it on being mercenaries to every warlord around the world. Mm-hmm. We're propping up ex-Soviet warlords in Afghanistan. We're propping up the North Korean God Kings. We're propping up the Pakistani regime, which is the only Islamic nuclear-armed regime on the planet. It's been interesting to me during the Ron Paul campaign. Somehow it was an important issue that Iran might get a nuclear bomb at some point in the distant future, but it is not important that we've already given a much crazier regime in Pakistan nuclear bombs paid for by the U.S. taxpayer.
Sure.
And we also armed the North Koreans. In fact, the United States gave North Korea 2 nuclear reactors.
Right, and I mean, so no one's going to claim that there's any country that's crazier than North Korea, and for whatever reason, the United States basically armed them.
Right. Actually, going back in history, there was one country that might fight them for the title, and that was Pol Pot in Kampuchea, but we also gave Pol Pot foreign aid even after the massacres.
That's nice.
Something that most people don't know, and that's a very interesting thing not to know. If your taxes are paying to prop up every dictatorship on the planet, it seems like that would be important to you. And if these people who claim to be very, I've talked to a lot of Republicans at local meetings that claim they're very, very concerned about defense. None of them know anything about foreign aid. They don't know what our money's going to do. They have no idea what we're propping up.
Right. It's like people that believe that you can dump more money into public education and get better education.
Yeah, exactly.
So just let's spend as much money as possible on quote-unquote defense, and then we'll get some defense. What other ways has Switzerland, which is, by the way, another melting pot essentially of cultures, how is it that they've managed to have better defense?
Well, the secret banking also gave them some defense against dictators. I don't think that's as big a factor as some people have made out to be, but it is true Hitler had a secret account. And it's also true that if he attacked Switzerland, he certainly was never going to see that money again.
That much is
because
probably true.
The gold in the Swiss banks was held at the backs of long tunnels, and they had them rigged to blow up. They also had the tunnels between Germany and Italy rigged to blow. In fact, the Swiss defense plan in World War II was kind of interesting. It was radically aggressive. It's funny. They were never going to leave their own country, and they're completely neutral. But it was a radically aggressive plan. The German Swiss guy that they put in charge of Swiss defense for World War II came up with a plan that would take the whole Swiss army out of the cities, move it into the mountains, and have it sit on those rail tunnels between Italy and Germany, thus making sure that Germany would lose the war. And he told the Germans that before. He said, yeah, you could probably take Geneva, but while you do that, we will be sitting on those tunnels blowing them up, and you will never, ever get back your supply line to Italy. We're going to fight it with the whole army for the rest of the war. And then, the threat worked.
Yeah, but you say what
it
you want.
It wasn't an empty threat, though. The guy really would have done it.
Yeah, say what you want about the situation. I mean, the Switzerland managed to stay out of World War II, World War I, which amazes me that they fought World War I just around Switzerland. But I hadn't thought about this until I read your article at antiwar.com, and I consider myself, like an amateur World War I expert, and I never even considered that Switzerland wasn't involved. But Germany darn sure did sweep north of them.
Yes, well, as the German general said, the treaty between Germany and Belgium was a scrap of paper. However, the Swiss militia was not a scrap of paper, and there wasn't any just brushing it out of the way. They couldn't just flank France by going through Switzerland. Yeah. All they would have succeeded in doing would be get themselves another front and go nowhere.
Indeed, and in Switzerland's not exactly low farmland anyway. So,
although actually, that's a little bit of a misconception because a lot of the population actually is in the low parts that are adjacent to Austria and Germany, and actually, it's fairly easy to invade those, except for the fact that it's full of Swiss armed with rifles.
Now, and you're saying people in their home have RPGs and that kind of thing?
Well, they're Swiss, so they're much more fancy than RPGs. But yes, they have anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles.
Wow.
Well, you think about it, they're really what is the civilian? Do people go to bars, get drunk, and shoot each other with anti-aircraft missiles?
Generally not.
Not very often, even in cultures that would do that, like the Afghan. It's simply not. It's not a close-range weapon. It's not something you can even fire in a bar without killing yourself, too.
So why don't they have crime like they have here in the United States? I mean, a lot of people would claim that if the United States population was armed like the Swiss, and frankly they probably are armed like the Swiss, that they would be shooting each other in the streets, and it sort of makes me wonder, what's the drug war like in Switzerland?
Well, they still do have a drug war because, like every other country, the United States has forced them to.
Right.
The Swiss, in fact, do not have much of a secret banking system anymore because the United States has pressured them. The United States says, okay, if you want to keep trading with us, you have to let our IRS look at your bank records. And that's why Mitt Romney has his accounts in the Cayman Islands and not Switzerland, because the Caymans still have bank secrecy.
Yeah, now, why is it that the Caymans, is that basically their only export, so they don't care?
Exactly. That's all they do, so they just refuse to give it up. The only way the Caymans are going to give up bank secrecy is when the troops land on them.
Yeah. And it's not impossible if some way that they can change the chips around on the map, then they would certainly probably try to do something just like that.
Oh, of course they would try. I'm sure the Caymans have to spend some money on bribery.
Indeed.
And some of that bribery may work against us, too. I was looking into the gambling. There's a bill to legalize gambling in New Hampshire coming up in the...
Yeah, but it's only like 2 places, right?
Right. And but I was researching the issue, and it turns out that the United States has succeeded in pushing the entire online gambling industry overseas. It's a $30 billion a year industry, and we managed to push the whole thing overseas. And so, of course, some of that's in the Cayman Islands, and
all online gambling?
Yes.
You wonder how many more people would gamble if it was easy, though, and if you're able to advertise it here in the United States and that kind of thing. I mean, other than picking up and going to Biloxi or Vegas or Atlantic City or whatever, what if you gamble online? And I think a lot of people would do it if they knew how.
Well, that's probably true. It's like drugs. More people would use drugs if they were legal. That might be a correct statement, although I'm not sure. I think some of the kids I know think I think they do it only because it's illegal. But okay, let's say it was true. Maybe there would be more, but just like drugs, it would be less damaging. Because now there's a lot of illegal gambling where you're not sure, there's going to be severe disagreements about people getting paid, people get shot. Also, if you're gambling to entertain yourself, it's obviously less efficient if it's not entertaining. And most of the government gambling, to me, seems extremely non-entertaining. I can't understand the people that play the lottery. That seems like the most boring thing you could possibly do, is sit there in a convenience store and throw money down the drain.
But I can't say that I spend a lot of money on it either. But, lots of people really enjoy doing that. So what can the United States learn from Switzerland? Could we be as safe as Switzerland?
We could be safer than Switzerland just because we're bigger. If the United States cut its military budget to a fifth of what it is now, instituted a Swiss shelter program, and actually brought some of our existing defensive weapons back, we already have Patriot missiles. They're defending Spain, they're defending Israel, they're defending Riyadh. If we brought those missiles back and put them around our cities, we could have a limited anti-ballistic missile defense and an anti-aircraft defense. If we brought our fighters back, we could have an anti-aircraft defense around the United States.
So these countries we don't allow them to buy the Patriot missiles. We just house them there and protect them.
Actually, that's not true. There are some countries that do buy Patriot missiles as well. However, we own a lot of them in the Middle East, and we could just tell them, a president could just call, if there were such a president that was actually trying to do something besides help Goldman Sachs, he could just tell the military, okay, move all your defensive stuff back to the United States. Take the missile cruisers that have their Aegis systems and their standard anti-aircraft missiles, move them back to the United States, have them defend the port cities. We could have a much better defense than the Swiss. We're much bigger, so even if a country made a full-scale nuclear attack on us, if we were protected as well as the Swiss, they would only kill, a few percent of the Americans, and
but with the Patriot missiles, they wouldn't be able to get the ICBMs through the. An ICBM wouldn't be able to get through Patriot missiles, right? Likely.
There's Pack 1, 2, and 3 Patriot missiles, and frankly, like most government programs, they're not that good. So probably yes, some of them would get through. However, it would increase the uncertainty.
Okay.
And if the companies were actually paid to have a competition where you had someone that was not them fire a missile at them and try to jam them, so there would be some sort of realistic practice for the missile system, the anti-missile systems might actually work. We have been shooting down ballistic missiles since 1962. There was a Nike Zeus test back in the early 60s that worked fine. And then there was a Sprint Spartan missile system that was brought up in 1975 and turned on for 1 day and then shut off.
Why is that?
Ted Kennedy, I believe, got that one. But in any case, the overall strategy supposedly is if the United States is completely vulnerable, that makes us safer because other countries will be deterred. You don't. So the MAD theory of military defense, MAD, which is what we're still using, is that if the United States tries to defend itself, that will make other countries produce more missiles to try to override our missiles, and that supposedly will make things more dangerous. Actually, I think the whole point is that the real war is between the people that control the Goldman Sachs and the rest of us, and they want us to be afraid of. They need a bogeyman.
So what can individuals do to learn from the Swiss model of protection?
Well, there's a lot of things you could do. There's some good stuff online about just setting up your own civil defense. Now, from a practical matter, the United States will probably just keep blundering along, invading more countries until we find we accidentally invade one that does have WMDs, and they will blow away some of our cities. So, I consider it very prudent for somebody to stock their basement and. There's a book called Nuclear War Survival Skills, which is free online. It was written by a guy that used to work for the United States Civil Defense.
How good is a basement in one of these situations? I mean,
even if you don't
it's not as good as a bunker, right?
No, it's nothing like a Swiss shelter. But even if you don't change anything about a basement, you still get a protection factor of about 100 against radioactive fallout, and you get a lot of protection against
blast, I would assume.
You get some protection against blast, but I was going to say you also get protection against biological weapons and chemical weapons if you just stay inside. What that old director of Homeland Security was saying about duct tape, it's actually true. You actually do want to keep some duct tape and plastic sheeting around because you want to be able to seal the house up if there's even a natural plague. That's the thing about civil defense is it's applicable to so many threats. If there's an asteroid hit or if there's just a natural flu, say we got a flu that's as bad as the 1918 flu, if you have food stockpiled in your basement, then you don't have to go out in the epidemic for a couple weeks. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
If you just stay home for a couple weeks, you've got a good chance of getting through the epidemic.
So, you're recommending to the listener have some duct tape and some Visqueen on hand, have some food on hand, which wisefoodstorage.com. You can go and use coupon code FTL and get some.
You need water before you need food, of course.
Indeed, water's a good idea. Now, how would one? I mean, at that point, you'd have to go outside in order to get the water. Usually wells are outside, right?
Well, you need the stored water. Stored water is more important than stored food. If you'd want to be able to stay indoors, I just have some 5-gallon water containers that are supposed to go on office water coolers. I just bought a few at Home Depot and I put them in the basement.
Probably a good idea. It would seem like backup power supply certainly wouldn't hurt.
Right. And speaking of backup power supply, the water actually came in very handy because, like you were talking about power monopolies earlier, our power monopoly is extremely unreliable. We have New Hampshire Electric Co-op up in Plainfield, and so we spend periods of a week at a time with no power.
Yeah, well, that'll get you self-reliant.
And it was very handy having some water ready to go, and be able to fill the toilets and have something to cook with.
Indeed. Well, Bill, thanks for stopping in and doing this interview with us. People can go to antiwar.com, and what's the best thing to do there? Search for Swiss?
So search for a Swiss or search for Bill Walker, and I'll be putting up more articles on different subjects.
Well, it's been great having you in the studio. In fact, you were helpful on the show this evening. You told us some stuff about nuclear reactors that we didn't know.
Yeah, the nuclear issue is interesting. If it's not a pro or anti-nuclear issue, it's a pro freedom issue. If you got rid of the Price-Anderson Act, which is the act that shifts all the liability for the nuclear reactors onto the taxpayer, if you got rid of that and then also got rid of the anti-nuclear regulation, then you could find out whether we could have safe reactors or not. I think we can. A lot of countries do. But the market would find the solution.
Now, you said that there were reactors that was impossible for them to melt down, and I imagine there's some people that are listening to this podcast that would like to have more information on that. What would they do to find out about that?
You could Google Argonne reactor 1986, and that would probably take you to the first reactor that was built that was meltdown proof because the fuel rods were made to expand fast enough that if it got too hot, the fissioning atoms would simply be moved apart from each other by the expanding alloy, and the reaction would shut off.
Wouldn't allow fission anymore.
Right. Toshiba has some good information on their site, and there's another pro-nuclear organization which is eluding me at the moment, but they have. Yeah, you want to look at Doppler scattering because that's the other method of keeping the reactors from being able to overheat. If you have too much Doppler scattering at a certain temperature, then the neutrons won't be able to interact with the other fissioning atoms, and they'll shut the reactor off. But the bottom line is, if you put the liability on the company will find the solution. It's like a lot of things, like education or anything else. You can't really get together in a town meeting and solve technical problems. The way you solve technical problems is you make sure that people that are working on it are the ones that have the liability, and they figure it out.
Makes sense to me. Bill, thanks for stopping in. And people can go over to